Ladies and gentlemen, there is hope that this war may end sooner than we realized. The hot babes of Instagram in Russia, like not a group, but like various hot babes, have taken to Instagram to denounce the war and say, enough. Thank you to these hot babes for having the courage to say things that most people don't have the courage to say. Well, in all honesty, most people are condemning the war. There's a lot of protesters in Russia that are opposing this war, and all bits aside, you know, it is good that they're speaking out against the war because Russia invaded, and it's wrong, and it's deeply complicated. But what we're seeing here with the rebellion of rich kids of Russia, the story, is U.S. propaganda working to convince the people of Russia to oppose Vladimir Putin. And I believe it's one of the reasons Vladimir Putin is actually engaging in the war. Yo, Putin sucks at influence war. This is a guy who's waging a ground war in Ukraine because he doesn't know how to use fifth generational warfare. Now, of course, Putin has engaged in fourth generational warfare. Let me slow down there and explain to you what's happening. Third generational warfare is like World War II. It's conventional. It uses very powerful weapons, airplanes, codes, things like that. You have the invasion currently underway in Ukraine, and that's effectively third generational war. Boots on the ground, tanks, etc. Fourth generational war was Vladimir Putin and the West staging protests or supporting separatist groups, basically getting insurgents to fight each other on your behalf so you can deny involvement. When that wasn't working for Vladimir Putin, he stepped it up, then went to third generational warfare. Meanwhile, the West is using fifth. Fifth generational warfare is things like this: convincing the children of your elites to protest against you, to get the rich kids, the Instagram models, the hot babes, to stand up and tell all of the people who follow them that what Vladimir Putin is doing is wrong. Now, truth be told, I prefer this substantially over shelling civilian targets. I think influence wars are substantially better and preferable to hot war and insurgency. Granted, I still don't like influence campaigns, but what is it really? I mean, look, what am I doing right now as I go on the internet and try and give you my perspective? It's influence building. And that's everything now. Whose culture will succeed? In the US, we have the culture war. People speaking online trying to push ideas or spread ideas or defend their ideas. In the international conflict scene and foreign policy, we have the same thing. And when it doesn't work, you end up with the next stage. First, the US engages in manipulation tactics. They can use influence, they can use bribery. When that doesn't work, you get protests like we saw in the Arab Spring. I'm not saying that was necessarily fomented by the US, but the US certainly supported it when these people were being removed from power. When that doesn't work, it escalates beyond there. This is where we are right now. Let me read you the story from the Daily Mail. The rebellion of the rich kids of Russia. Oligarchs' kids, including Sofia Abramovich and the daughter of Putin's spokesman, share Instagram messages against the Ukraine invasion. Now, why did they do this? Because they have influence, they have followers in the West. These are people who may have hundreds of thousands, maybe they have millions of followers, maybe not, maybe only tens of thousands. But many of their followers may be from other countries, and they're worried. If I get banned from Instagram, who's going to click the like button on my photos? So, of course, the hot babes got to step up and make sure they don't lose their industry. The Daily Mail reports, comments show how the next generation of Russia view the ongoing conflict. It also suggests some gap between Putin's government and younger people living in the country. Ksenia Sobchak, a socialite and former Russian presidential candidate, has led the condemnation and urged peace. The presenter, who has denied being Putin's goddaughter, said on Instagram, the main topic, a real conflict with Ukraine in which no one, including me, believed until the last. I mean, I didn't believe it either, to be honest. When Russia recognized the self-proclaimed republics of Donbass, it seemed that this was already kind of intermediate finish. So this photo right here is Roman Abramovich's daughter, Sofia, 23, who regularly shares snaps of her lavish lifestyle online. She posted against the war. Now, Abramovich, her father, Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich, is currently attempting to sell the club for $3 billion amid fear of sanctions. So you have a lot of high-profile Russian oligarchs and elites who, there's one story we have, France seized the yacht of one of these guys. They're trying to shift their wealth back into Russia, somewhere where it will be protected. Sofia Abramovich said, It says Russia wants a war with Ukraine, but Russia is crossed out, and it says Putin. The biggest and most successful lie of Kremlin's propaganda is that most Russians stand with Putin. Now, I will point out, when the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, we had the same means. I think it's meaningless. I don't think Vladimir Putin or NATO or any government cares what these people have to say. By all means, they can save face. Oh, don't blame us, the Russian people, but let's be real. The American population's taxes were used to finance the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Granted, there's other things involved, like the petrodollar, the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, etc., etc. The civilians of Russia can speak out all they want, and I respect it, but it is the work they do that funds the war effort, and that's just a reality. I'm not blaming the Russian civilians or the American civilians for anything. I'm just saying civilians are a component in the machine. Quote, it was the very beginning the military conflict began. Shares have collapsed. The EU is preparing sanctions. Arrests for anti-war pickets have begun all over Russia. The RKN promises to punish the media that quote an unofficial point of view. What's next? How will at least today's endless day end? It's impossible to calculate. The only thing known for sure is that people are dying. Sobchak is known to have flown to Turkey with her young son. So she did so as tens of thousands of Russians are leaving amid fears that draconian martial law will be imposed in the near future and their concern over war. I want to just make sure we're being careful here. Propaganda? Perhaps. When we see these beautiful women posting on Instagram, I mean, look, she's got her strap falling down on her arm or whatever. A very promiscuous pose, as it were. I mean, this is very beneficial to the Western efforts, stopping Russia from engaging in this conflict. And when they come out and they say they fear that Putin will crack down and arrest them all, it's also propaganda. The West is very good at information and influence warfare. I'm not saying it's not true. It may be true. I mean, I've certainly seen photos of people being arrested, but I've also experienced these protests, and I see how these activists lie to try and gain power and push their way. Do I think Vladimir Putin is a comic book villain who is going to just arrest all of the protesters? I don't. In New York, they arrested hundreds of protesters during Occupy Wall Street. Are they the comic book villains? Well, they do it too. During the Iraq War, we saw the same thing. During the Afghanistan invasion, protesters get arrested. So we see it. It happens everywhere. But they want to come out and make it seem like Putin is this demonic oppressor. Yo, countries have agendas. Now, Vladimir Putin is in the wrong on this one. He was losing the influence battle, and that's just too bad. If we make cool stuff and people in Ukraine want to support the West and be involved in what the NATO and the US are doing, too bad for Vladimir Putin. But of course, he's unwilling to let it go, so he resorts to an invasion. I've been reading more about the Budapest Memorandum, and it's not technical. Some people have said that the West is in violation of the memorandum by not intervening to help Ukraine. But my understanding, after a cursory glance, is that it's most specifically relates to nuclear weapons. Long story short, I believe it was Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine. The idea was Ukraine and these other countries would give up all of their nuclear weapons if these other countries promised not to invade, not to attack them, not to aggress against them, and not to use nuclear weapons against them. Talk about stupid. Sorry, it's just a reality. I mean, it may be better for the world that less people have nukes, but they returned their nuclear arsenal to Russia, and now Russia's invading them. The issue was, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia controlled the nuclear weapons, but Ukraine controlled access to them. And as such, it was kind of a stalemate. Ukraine could have held them. They couldn't really do anything with them. Why would you agree to give up your weapons and give them to someone else who is your enemy is beyond me. That's what they did. Well, now what we have are these claims among these models and influencers that Russia is this evil comic book villainy or whatever. We have this post from Maria Yumasheva, daughter of government advisor Valentin Yumashev, has also shown her support for Ukraine on Instagram. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Luke was saying this, that Yumasheva, she has the A at the end of her name, and her dad doesn't, because it's like a male-female thing. Like Luke was saying, I didn't know this, that in Poland, Luke Rutkowski of We Are Change, if you're a dude, your name would be like Rutkowski, like his, and if he marries a woman, her name would be Rutkowska, because it's like, so I don't know, weird to me. You know, here in the West, we just share the same last name and they're not gendered. She's also a prolific poster on her social media, and has scores of pictures on her public Instagram feed. So the reason I'm highlighting this, for one, I do think there's some humor in a throwback joke to the Australian hot babe propaganda. This was when in Australia they were setting up these COVID camps, and they had all of these hot babes posting photos like they were just absolutely loving being in this camp. And then, of course, I was criticized, and then this particular individual was like, look at all these hot babes, enjoying their stay at the Howard Springs quarantine facility where they're not allowed to escape. They'll be hunted down. Yeah, I think the use of hot babes for propaganda is kind of obvious. And this is something that I think the West has absolutely bet upon. TikTok is controlled by China. No surprise, TikTok is gaining influence. Donald Trump wanted to ban it. I don't think he was wrong. You see, on Instagram, they would love it if Russians and Chinese influencers were on their platform, because then they control the perspective of these individuals. If you're a Russian youth or a young woman with 1 million followers or whatever, and you're making money selling ads and you're living a good life, you don't want to lose it. And of course, we are seeing the West ban Russian citizens from apps like this. Of course, they will come out and say, no. This is Elizaveta Peskova, daughter of Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, posting her own take on the conflict online. So you have all of these people who are the daughters or family members of high-profile Russian government officials, and they're against what Putin is doing. This is a problem. Because with influence comes, it's a problem for Putin, mind you. It's good for us. The problem for Putin is that if enough Russian civilians are rallied, that's it. Now take a look at this story. Putin cracks down on anti-war protests in Russia with more than 6,500 arrests. I don't necessarily believe it, to be honest, but I don't disbelieve it. I'm just concerned about Western propaganda. They say demonstrations have taken place in more than 100 Russian cities since Vladimir Putin sent his forces to attack Ukraine, according to the OVD Info Project, an independent Russian human rights monitoring group. It's possible. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, we had massive protests. In fact, we had protests all over the world. I would not be surprised if there were thousands of arrests across the country. But again, you got to be careful because, we're in this era of misinformation, disinformation, and that's true. But now I'd like to highlight this interesting story for you. Medusa in English. This is breaking news in Russian, investigative reports. Verified on Twitter says Russian lawmakers have put forward legislation that would conscript into the military anyone prosecuted for protesting the invasion of Ukraine. Now, in reality, the stupidest idea I have ever heard. For its more surreptitious manipulation, maybe a little bit smart, but let's read. In this post, it says LDPR lawmakers put forward legislation that would conscript anti-war protesters into the military. Lawmakers from the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia have submitted a draft law to the State Duma that would conscript into military service anyone prosecuted for participating in unsanctioned protests opposing the deployment of Russian troops abroad. What's more, the bill suggests sending prosecuted protesters for military service on the territories of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics in eastern Ukraine. They'll never do that. It's the stupidest thing you can do. But I think they're trying to scare these people. You've got people who are going out and protesting, and Russia's basically trying to manipulate them into not doing it. Or these politicians specifically. I don't know about Putin. You know why this is a bad idea? Well, Vietnam, for instance, drafting people to go fight in a war that have no interest in it, have not volunteered to do so, creates very serious skill and morale problems. In this instance, sending 6,500 people who've been arrested, let's say they're all prosecuted, and it's like, all right, here's your gun, go into this region. Listen, depending on the level of radicalization for some of these people, you may end up with them actually fighting on the side of the Ukrainians or taking up the Ukrainian offer for 5 million rubles if they surrender. Truth be told, I don't know if 5 million rubles will be worth all of that much money in the near future due to the market collapsing. But I think this is Putin's, I don't want to say his last stand. I believe it's a strong stand, and we're seeing a dramatic escalation in what's happening. I did want to keep this one focused on the internal happenings of Russia and the peripheral crackdown, but there is a lot of breaking news about the expansion of this war, which I'll be getting to in the next segment. Take a look at this. France seizes yacht linked to Russian oligarch at Mediterranean port. The vessel linked to Igor Sechin, taken as Hamburg authorities deny confiscation of Alisher Usmanov's 600 million super yacht. They're coming for you, baby. They're coming for everybody. When they say that the West isn't involved in this war, that's a lie. The West is just playing 4D chess, and Putin is forced to engage on the ground. He doesn't have the influence campaigns or the reach to do anything about what's happening in Ukraine. But I'll tell you, man, I'm talking to some people in the region. I'm talking to friends and contacts, and it really does seem Putin has no thought for the Ukrainians. This is about taking the land. It's about maintaining control over the natural resources that are sold by Russia. I can certainly understand and respect a leader's desire to make sure he can provide for his people. But at the expense of the Ukrainians is absurd. When you lose, fight better. And what I mean by that is fight smarter. What Putin is doing is making everything worse for Russia. He's even got the young people in Russia posting messages in support of the West. It's a mistake. What Putin did was a mistake. He could have gone out. I'll tell you what the weirdest thing is to me. And I'll tell you, people don't understand the mentality of Vladimir Putin and the Russians. Well, I've told this story before, but I remember seeing these movies when I was little, where it was like watching a story about the Crusades, and there's like, a Christian guy, and he's like got his sword to the Muslim guy, and he's like, renounce your God. And the guy's like, never. And then he gets slain or something. And I always thought to myself, why wouldn't you just say what you need to say to survive, to make sure you win in the future, your ideas persist? I certainly now understand, though, with the culture war and the depravity of the cult and the woke cult, why someone would just say, never, I won't do it. I will stand on principle. I believe there's strategy issues there in sacrificing your life to say a few words, but I certainly understand the sentiment. Vladimir Putin is a man of that sentiment. He is sacrificing everything because he refuses to back down. Think about it. Russia could very well have just aligned itself with Europe, worked on agreements, and been very agreeable with the glowing global influence. And I don't mean like the evil globalists. I mean like the trade agreements and the Schengen zone and parts of the EU. I'm not a big fan of the EU. I'm not saying the man should just bend the knee, because you're unreasonable. But he certainly could have just said, let's make accommodations and work out treaties. And he could have negotiated things that probably would have greatly benefited Russia. But Vladimir Putin views Russia as the inheritor of a great empire long lost, in which case, in order to rebuild it, he must stand, he must fight, and he must assert. He doesn't want to be beneath. I get it. But now I feel Vladimir Putin has just condemned himself to the sewers of history. He's not going to win this one. I mean, look, he might win Ukraine. I think Russia is winning. I think they're winning this war, but I believe he will not win history, and he will not win beyond just taking Ukraine. Maybe that's it, a bucket list move. It really does feel like it's some old dude, he's 70 years old, and he's like, man, you know what I've never done? I've never taken a sports car across the country. And then so he goes and takes a big chunk of his retirement and buys like a Dodge Challenger limited edition, stick shift, and then goes and drives across the country to live out his lost youth. Vladimir Putin is nearly 70 years old, and it feels like he's just saying, I got one last ride in me, and I'm not going to back down. But this is having negative consequences on the Russian people, many of whom don't want the war, many of whom are already siding with the West. The Western influence and cultural expansion is happening. Now, I'll tell you, it's scary. It's scary because companies like Instagram and Twitter and YouTube, they're censorious. I'll tell you, man, you want to know what's really crazy? You guys know Lee Camp? Lee Camp is a lefty. He is not right-wing. Spotify has taken his podcast down. Anti-war leftist. Why? He works for RT. Man, not a good place to be. Personally, I don't want to take any money from Russia, and I wouldn't. I remember I told this story at DEF CON about how RT was trying to buy footage off me from Sweden, and I just said, no way, I'm not doing it. I'm never going to walk into that. I don't know what Russia's on about. I don't want to be involved in that. Not interested. Don't need Russian state media money. For that matter, the BBC is the same. I don't want to sell anything to anybody. But there have been agencies who have bought my footage. I don't know where it ends up. But I'm not interested in doing that stuff. But to ban the podcast of an American citizen, Lee Camp, a good dude. He's a good dude. He really is. I've known him for a long time. Anti-war, anti-authoritarian. I mean, it's outright insane. And what's he supposed to do? Should he quit RT and go independent? Maybe. This is where things are going. And this is why you see stories like that. This is exactly why these Russian models are posting messages. I don't think they know or care. I think they probably care a little bit, but I think they're more concerned with themselves. This is why you see people like Chris Reagan. He deleted the Punch a Nazi video. He removed it. I believe he did that because he was scared about being on the quote-unquote wrong side of history or having his accounts banned. I believe that Ethan Klein came out and went from being edgy and even liking Jordan Peterson to going woke and supporting the establishment because they're scared of being banned. I'm not scared of anybody. Maybe you know what I'm scared of? Giant hornets, I guess. Although I don't know if I'm actually scared enough to actually say it's something to be afraid of. I don't get it, man. I don't get it. The other day, I put up a video on YouTube. It took 3 hours to process. And I reached out to YouTube and they were like, can't help you. And then I tried uploading the video on other channels. It wouldn't go up. The video, of course, was about statements made by Sergei Lavrov in World War III. This morning, I was having the same problem. Something was jamming up the publishing of my videos, and I don't know what. My video went up like 2 hours late because I uploaded it. I put it up at 3, and then it took 2 hours and 47 minutes to process before it was able to go live. As soon as I tweeted out the problem was happening, the videos just magically went live. It's almost like they were held. Several years ago, maybe 8 years ago, Luke Rudkowski of We Are Change noticed ads were being pulled off of all of his YouTube videos. There wasn't a such thing as demonetization. They were just turned off. So Luke went in and started turning the ads back on, which worked. This was before demonetization. But yes, people at Google were removing advertisements from his channels. It was only later they decided to create the automated system of demonetization to make it easier. Now it shows you with a yellow $sign you've been demonetized. At the time, the only options they had was add on, add off. So they would go to Luke's videos and say add off. And then Luke would go in and turn it back on, and they couldn't do anything about it. Is YouTube screwing with me? It may be. It may be. Why? Because I'm not scared to call out Western propaganda. But you know what, man? The censorship is annoying. Y'all should not have banned Lee Camp. Lee Camp opposes war. He's not a fan of what Russia is doing. He's not a fan of U.S. intervention, and maybe that's the case. Maybe they want U.S. and NATO intervention in Ukraine, but they need public support first. And thanks to the likes of anti-war populists, be it Lee Camp, me, or anyone on the right, we're blocking them by calling this out. I will call out propaganda from Putin, from the left, all day, every day. I don't care. Tell the truth. But I'll tell you this. Putin invaded. He was wrong. He's violating, to a certain degree, the Budapest Memorandum. He's in the wrong. He is killing civilians. He is wrong. He's losing. He's losing the influence war. And his only option was military. He may be winning. I believe he is winning from the military fight. But I think it will be a stake in the heart of Russia. He can take Ukraine, fine. But good luck. Good luck. Maybe China will back him and maybe we'll get World War III. And is that what this is really about? It's a crazy world, man. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.